also are here for the podcasting 101, I guess I'd say webinar. I forget what I called it. I think I called it podcasting 101. Not sure, that's why I stumbled for a second. This is basically put out to PPC members here for us to really see, the power really behind podcasting and what we can do. So I'm going to share a real quick sort of like PowerPoint that I put together. I think I put it in PDF form. So this is kind of my first time. Always a good idea to do something the first time live, right? I mean, how else would you do it, right? So let's see how this works here. Okay, can y'all see that right now?
I can.
Awesome. And I need to also make sure I keep an eye on if anybody else comes in. So y'all keep me abreast if you see anybody else that comes in on there.
Sure.
Okay, so podcasting, another way to get yourself heard. A podcast is a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer or mobile device, typically available as a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically. So basically what happens with a podcast is that there's what's created as an RSS feed. Probably y'all might even be already familiar with this. And basically there's feeders out there that look for that new indication that there's a new file available, and then it puts it out there and promotes it for you. The term podcasting is thought to be an amalgamation of iPod and broadcasting, so it's a fairly new concept. Basically, a podcast is an audio blog, so if you're already kind of familiar with blogging, podcasting is simply another way to create your work and put it out there. It's available for instant play or for download for later play by interested listeners, and that's the power behind it, is that it can either be instant play or it's something that people can put on later. There's some really interesting facts about podcasting. One of the first one is more Americans are familiar with podcasts in 2018 to 2017. I'm sorry, a lot of these facts are really centered on the United States, and I've found that from some of the information I've looked at, there's some countries, for instance, South Korea kind of shocked me a little bit, that actually has a higher podcast statistics than even the U.S. So a lot of the other countries are the same or even have more of an infiltration of podcasts there. New research shows that more Americans know what a podcast is than who the vice president currently is. 12 million more Americans have listened to podcasts in 2018 than in 2017, so that's quite a growth. 32% of Americans 25 to 54 listen to podcasts monthly. Podcast listening among American women has jumped 14% in 1 year. And what I want you to kind of take note of is that what is your target audience? And I think for a lot of us, our target audience is really cluing into, who are actually listening to podcasts and the audience that's growing in that. Podcast fans listen to an average of 7 shows per week, so they're really dedicated to it. 80% of podcast listeners hear all or most of each episode they consume. So I know a lot of times, like when I go to my Facebook Lives, I'll see that like 20 seconds of it got watched, or there's a lot of 3-second views. Well, how did you really connect with the audience in that moment? And I think so much of it is because, people are doing other things, so it's really hard to sit there and really concentrate on a video. And I know especially for men are very visual. So if we know something is going to be visual, we know we don't really have the brain space to really commit time to it. We tend to not even really want to watch the video because we know that we're not going to really be able to really fully invest in it. Whereas with a podcast, most podcasts are audio. Although there are video podcasts, at this point, I'm really going to be really focusing on an audio podcast, really more video podcasts, more vlogcasts. So we're really concentrating this time on audio podcasts. Apple confirmed as of June 2018, there are 550,000 podcasts. I think their latest statistics are something like 628,000 podcasts. So the number of podcasts is really growing. 50% of all homes, and this is for the US, are podcast fans. 45% of monthly podcast listeners have a household income of over $75,000. And they found beyond that those podcast listeners also happen to usually have a large, an overall amount of wealth to them. So there's some money there. 27% of US podcast listeners have a 4-year college degree or more. 65% of monthly podcast listeners have been listening for less than 3 years, so they're fairly new to it. And what that means is they're looking for that fresh new content. They're looking for that new voice. They're looking for that new thing out there. Podcast listeners are 94% active on social media, which I thought was a really interesting statistic, because that means that they can find you on other platforms. If you're not just doing podcasting, if you're also on Facebook or Instagram or YouTube or some of these other social medias, it's going to be really easy for them to search for you and search for who you are on your other different platforms. Basically, the recording can be derived from video or it can be directly recorded to audio. It can be a one-person show, entire groups, telephone recordings, interviews over Skype, Webinar Jam, Zoom, or other platforms. Any way that you can record your voice really digitally, whether it's through a phone, a tablet, an iPad, a computer, any kind of voice recorder that can be used as a source for a podcast. So my idea there is to really take out that idea of, how do I produce this? If you're already recording yourself in some way, whether it's through audio or video, you really already have content that can be used for a podcast. The basic rules really for a podcast, as far as building your audience, is consistency, sound quality, and relevant content. Those other things that really come into play, like tagging, graphics, platforms, and other components to make that podcast successful. But it's really those first three criteria that are really important, because you can blast something out there all you want to, but if it sounds terrible or if it's not really relevant or you're not putting it out there on a consistent level, it's just going to be like kind of just throwing it out there to the wind. Now, why do people buy? A lot of experts say that people buy from people they trust, and people buy things that are in front of them. So those are the two things they're looking for. I know that's basic. I ask myself all the time when I'm about to click the buy button, why am I buying this? What is it that is triggered in me the idea that the value of this is worth taking this money out of my checking account and actually putting it to this other person? There has to be that exchange of value. So a lot of times you might ask yourself, what is it that is making me buy this person's product? Especially if it's something like along the lines of something that you do, if it's a digital product and you're not actually getting a physical thing in the mail, what is it that's making me click on the buy button? One of the best ways to grow your brand, your audience, and your revenue is to have that relevant quality content available so that the seeking audience sees you as an expert in the field. I really see podcasts as simply another platform that you can use, and I like to put myself on as many platforms, and also anybody I work with, on as many platforms as possible, whether it's Periscope or Instagram or Facebook or YouTube or podcasting or your own website, and also tagging with each other so that other people are promoting you. And that's one of the great things about when you have like an internet or an interview show and you're interviewing somebody, say, that has a new program or they're writing a book or whatever it is, because they have an invested reason in actually blasting you out there to their audience. And that's just a way to kind of, grow and grow, kind of sort of on top of each other, right? Creating like this sort of like a mountain where you're climbing on top of each other. Since the material can be live or pre-recorded, you can prepare as much of this content ahead of time as you wish and then set up for automatic distribution so that you can have relevant content that's consistent and not have it take over your life. So sometimes I'll record for myself personally 5 or 6 or 7 things all at one sitting that have sort of like maybe a relevant theme or pretty close to each other. And then I've got, 7 or 10 or 14 days worth of content or whatever that I can blast out there, that I can even set up a lot of that ahead of time. So basically I don't have to do anything and people are getting to see, things that are out there. And the other key thing about that is to think about who your target audience is and how long are they going to stay engaged in your material. There's so much out there and we have such limited time that it's really important. I just went through this class today, as a matter of fact, on being a comedian. And one of the things they got into everybody about was the idea of really stripping down what you're saying, stripping down your jokes, and it even gets the same of even any type of content, stripping down to the nitty gritty of it, taking out a lot of the fluff so that it can really, and I hope I'm doing that today, so that, people's time, is relevant and people's time is respected, in whatever they do. Where does it go? So there are a number of different platforms available to distribute your podcast, such as iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spotify. And each of these will target and distribute your recording to an audience seeking new content. And the great thing behind these different companies is that the way that they grow is by actually promoting you, is by finding new audience for you and really targeting you. So it's like they have a vested interest in helping your podcast grow. So why are they popular? The reason the audience loves podcasts is they can be listened to while traveling, at work, doing chores at home, or simply relaxing. The content can be downloaded and then listened to on demand, making it extremely convenient for the listener. Every type of recording you can imagine has an audience and someone seeking for new content. Whether you interview interesting people, teach on a topic, do meditations, give reviews or reviews on things, sing, or almost anything, there is an available audience ready to listen. I mean, if you look through the different types of podcasts out there and the different genres and what what they're focused on, there's just everything. There's fitness and there's spirituality and there's particular types of business and there's particular things within business, whether it be marketing or accounting. I mean, there's everything, like taking care of your dog, and I mean, just absolutely everything out there. There is an audience and there is a podcast on it. What do I need? So basically all you need to start out with is a recording. It can be audio or video, whether it's a Facebook Live or something you simply record on your phone. It can be used as a source. You can start out where you are and continue to use what you're comfortable with or expand to more expensive equipment over time. As long as the sound quality is decent, you're ready to go. Because one of the things I always tell a lot of people that are asking me about it, I say start with what you've got. Don't go out there. A lot of people I think use as a block this idea of I've got to go out there and spend $2,000 or $3,000 on equipment before I can get started. And it's so important to start where you are and grow from where you are. If you look at anybody, whether it's Gary Vaynerchuk or Oprah Winfrey or Tony Robbins or anything, if you look at their early works, their new works are so polished and so clean and so ready to go, but that's not where they started. They started with what they had, with where they were, and they were able to grow it. I always tell people to try to make your business and what you're doing pay for itself, along the way. What about the technical side of things? This is where, if you want me to, I can come into place. So basically what I did was I asked Lee, I said, do you want to make this another component of PC or what do you want to do? And she said, there's so much going on. If you want to do this yourself, you can. And I'm not saying that you necessarily have to pay me for anything, but I'm just saying if you want me to help you to actually do it, I will. If you want just pointers and ask questions, I'm absolutely available for that. But if you're not techie and you don't really know what you're doing, I know, Andy, you're probably more techie than I am, so you probably can take this and absolutely run with it. Linda, I'm not sure where you are, if I can help or not in any way. But if you don't know how to edit, how to create an RSS feed, if you upload or download your content, create graphics, post tags, or even write descriptions, you don't have to. All I simply need is access to your content. I can strip the audio from the videos and take care of the rest. And after a few days, you'll be able to subscribe to your own podcast and then share it out to your friends and fans. Now, if you feel techie, this is absolutely something. I mean, you can get started so quickly, and that it's right out there. So if you do it for yourself, there's still a cost. The physical cost is of hosting the podcast and paying for the upload and download bandwidth. There's many of them out there. I've even used some of the free ones, and they can be a little janky. I forget what it's called. I think it's called Podbean. I'm not sure if it's still around, but I think that one had like a free option on it. But like I say, there was like very, very, I only think you can have like one every so often, and it could only be so long, and it had to be of certain quality, like a lower quality for it to even work. And I think I did it for a little while and got really frustrated with it and stopped. There's also time if I help you to help you create that podcast, coming up with your graphics, your descriptions, your links, your intro and your outro. Basically, you want to take that raw recording and you want to have like a little recording up front that sort of like talks, just very shortly, like maybe 10 seconds with maybe some music behind it, says, what this is, who you are, and then maybe at the end, how people can contact you further. You also want to come up with some relevant tags, kind of like hashtags, and also a lot of times if you look like on a YouTube video or different things, there's like little tags that'll like for spirituality or for whatever it is, marketing or something like that, so that people searching for that, it'll come up easily into their feed. Ongoing recording will have to be prepared, uploaded, and even maintained. What kind of time frame as far as like your podcast? So really, most of the experts say that at least weekly is recommended. If it's relevant enough and you can keep it consistent, you can even just do it monthly. I like to say that at least bi-weekly, or at least twice a month, is something you really want to try to shoot for. But if you can have a new episode at least weekly, With some of my projects that I have going on, I even have something that's very short that comes up daily, but you want to make sure that's kind of short because even your dedicated fans don't have a lot of time, to really clue in with you. As far as what is the tech that's involved, you need a way to record yourself. If it's video, you need to be able to extract that audio from it. You might have to correct the audio background noise. There might be, somebody might have rang a telephone in the middle of it, or rang a doorbell, or who knows, maybe your cat jumped on your lap and you screamed right in the middle of it. You want to be able to add an intro and outro audio to that mix to create the finished recording. And you want to be able to create graphics for your podcast, because a lot of times what people draw people in is, like, if you're on iTunes, you'll see an actual picture that kind of goes along with that podcast that you want to be relevant, to kind of draw people in, that has something to do along with your theme. You also need to be able to create an RSS feed, and that's how those different distributing sites find you and actually pull that content. And there usually is a monthly cost to host that RSS feed. So will you get rich from this? Most famous broadcasters have said that they had to at least put a year's worth of content out there before they became viral. There really are no overnight successes. It's just that simply from one day to the next, all of a sudden we hear about somebody. It seems like they came out of nowhere, but if you go back and look, there's so much content behind them. And I think that's what happens, is that it's almost like this sort of like a snowball effect, where they get to this certain point of where people start really sharing them out. And then I think the ones that are really, really effective and able to keep it going, they've been doing it for a while. So there's like lots of back episodes that people can listen to, a lot of back stories. Two that really come to mind for me are Marie Forleo and Gary Vaynerchuk. They both have said, that it took them about a year with daily putting content up, or whatever it was, whether it was weekly, before finally they sort of took hold and people really noticed them. I'm going to say it wrong, but Nusir Yassin, he runs NAS Daily on Facebook. It's a 1-minute show where he's dedicated to traveling the entire world. He dedicated himself to where he would do this for an entire year. I heard him talking one time about how it was right around episode 300 before he really had any followers whatsoever. And now all of a sudden there's just millions who view him. And Facebook has actually sponsored his show, but he had to really commit himself to that. A lot of famous people have used podcasts to even revive their brand and revive their business. This is Joe Rogan and Mark Maron are two that I've listened to theirs before. They've talked about how that has been how they've revived or added to their platforms to become even more famous and have their stuff out there. And they've even used it to help other people to really get out there and be known as well. Some of the key points, again, are consistency, relevancy, and good sound quality. But it's also to make sure that your podcast is focused on a particular theme, community, or style. If your podcast is on travel, you want to keep it there. If it's on a particular kind of aspect or business, you want it to stay there. If it's on meditation, it should always be on meditation. Otherwise, you confuse and lose your audience. There's so much content out there nowadays that we need to be very focused and very directive about what that podcast is. And you can have more than one podcast if you're saying, I would love to do one on this and that. You can have as many podcasts as you have time to really record things for, as long as you can have that consistency to it. But you want to make sure that your podcast is very focused and very directed, even if it's on a particular community. Like I have one for LGBTQ, so it can be kind of a little bit around about it, but it's very directed as to who that community is. Now, if I do it for you, basically I usually charge $80 per month, but I would do $40 per month. I would like to have at least a 6-month minimum. Some people have told me I should have an upfront fee, but I'm not going to. That's where the 6-month minimum comes into play to help you to get your graphics. Basically what it would be, taking any digital file and extracting it, cleaning it up, helping you to create your intro and outro and adding it to each recording. And whether I do it or you do it, this is what I would suggest you do for yourself. Inputting or creating graphics for your show, helping with your theme and name. Those are all, these are things that are going to stick with it forever. So you want to be very conscious of what you name it and what the theme of it is. Whether you and then creating a description for each episode should be very descriptive as far as what it is, because a lot of times that's how people are going to find you. Relevant tags for each episode, so people can search and find you, and then being able to host and maintain those files and uploading those podcasts to all the different feeds that are out there. There's something like 30 or 40 of them. That's why I don't have them all listed. So basically, if I help you, it's basically you're going to help me with the graphics and the descriptions and the tags and the show names, and just provide me with the content, and I'll even help you to create the content. And I would also suggest that you put that content, especially if it's video, on as many different platforms as you possibly can, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, your own website. I've even got a meditation channel that's going and some other things. So just as many places as you can possibly put it out there is what I suggest that you absolutely do, so that you can, I believe in taking one piece of material and throwing it out there in as many ways as it possibly can. I'm going to stop sharing that, and I'm going to come back. So I wanted to make this just kind of as you know, I'm as quick as I can, because I want to respect your time, but also want to kind of open it to any questions. This isn't necessarily about promoting me. I'm just saying that my shingle is out there. If you want to use me, you don't have to. I'm absolutely here to answer any questions, because with PPC, it's about getting ourselves out there. And right now, Lee is really on this big push to have content. Because if so many people I really talk to and counsel, they're like, how can I grow my business? And I'm like, well, can people find you, number one, and do you have anything for sale? And I find out it's usually one or both, a combination. There's no way for people to actually find them, and they don't even have anything for sale, so how can people even find them, right? So is there any questions or comments or anything that I can clarify or help with at this point? Either one of you have?
Yeah, Pete, so I already do have a podcast, but what I'm focusing on this year is building my numbers. Do you have any tips or ideas for promotion?
I mean, I guess I would say it's going to be putting it on as many platforms as you possibly can. And I think you do most of yours with interviews, right? Is that you're doing the Real Men Feel?
Yep.
Is that right? So what I would say to you is to continue to do that, and have those people share it out, and maybe try to reach out to as many people that already have a large audience as you have. If you already tried to do that, know that that can be really hard to get contact with them. But I'll get like maybe one response for every 10 that I put out there to people that have like a large following. But that one person, if they have a large following, especially if they're about to write a book or if they're doing some kind of a program, they become really, really quite willing to go on as many platforms as they possibly can. I mean, of course, you can also do, if you have it, there are, I don't know which platform you use, but there's different platforms that will automatically shout out to your social platforms. And then of course you can also do, ads through there. I don't ever really suggest spending a lot of money on ads, but it certainly can be helpful. It can boost it just a little bit. Sometimes numbers per se aren't necessarily like real views that are really going to help you. So I like to stay fairly targeted on that as well.
Yeah, I've been looking at, ever since I started to get lots of spam going, podcast promoters all over LinkedIn and Twitter, and they seem just to be mostly scams. So I was just wondering if you've had any more positive experience with a service or anything like that. But
I mean, it's just basically just putting out there and putting out there and putting out there and putting out there, and that's why I made the one key point about the ones that have made it are talking about how it really was that 300 level of or that 1 year period for and then they just stayed in there. You know what I mean?
One thing I would suggest, anyone that has a podcast, be a guest on other podcasts. Because I've lost track of how many shows I've been on now that I've had one, and people often find me and want to reciprocate. So that's a great thing to do.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot out there, and I think it's about staying targeted and just putting yourself out there as many ways as you possibly can.
Cool. Thanks.
You have a question, Linda?
No, actually, I was listening to, this is directed kind of for Andy. I was listening to a course about branding, and one of the things that they were talking about was podcasting. And he recommended 2 websites that I'm going to share with you. You may know about these and you may not. They're radioguestlist.com. So radioguestlist.com and podcastguests.com. And that is where people are looking for guests for their podcasts, apparently. So I'm just sharing that with you guys. Cool. You may know about it, you may not.
That radioguestlist.com, you can list yourself as either somebody seeking or to record people or to be interviewed, either one. And there's free levels and there's paid levels, and I have worked with that a little bit and had some success. but I think it's how much you're willing to pay to put yourself out there in that, but I'm not familiar with the Comcast or what would say the
Podcast guest.
Podcastlist.com. I'm not familiar with that one, but I do know the radio guest list has been
Yeah.
around for quite a long time.
And just one point, Facebook has multiple free groups so search for anything and a lot will show up, but there's lots of promote your podcast groups. And I'm in a group called I'll Guest on Your Podcast, and it's people exchanging and promoting, and those are all free. So just search Facebook for podcast and you'll probably find dozens and dozens of various groups to explore, but the ones I found have all been legit and helpful.
That's amazing. All right, y'all. Well, I want to respect your time. Is there any other questions that you have for me or anything else that you want to bring up or any comments from yourself or anything I can do to help?
I do have a question for you guys that podcast. Do you find it is beneficial? Because I'm not looking to be a radio personality. I don't want to be a podcast personality per se. So podcasting for me would be a way of getting seen and heard and, some promotion for what I do. Do you think that's a valid reason to put in the effort for podcasting? Because, it's going to be a lot of effort to do that.
Well,
so what's your thoughts?
If you're already recording something, you can use that recording as another way this is just another venue, another platform to put you on. So that's one thing I wanted to really make clear, is that this isn't necessarily like one more gosh darn thing I got to do. You can source stuff that you're already doing. But it is, consistency and time frame are really important in podcasting besides sound quality and relevance. But if it's something that you don't think that you can do over a longer period of time, I don't know if it'd be worth your investment. But if you're already recording something, even if it's video, it can be extracted. Now, the one thing about you taking video and turning it into audio, a lot of times when we're doing video, we what's the word? We don't really focus necessarily so much on the audio during the video. In other words, there's a lot of things visually happening that people aren't going to be able to see as they're listening. So you need to be very conscious of, people are made to simply be listening. So you need to make sure that people have something to hear or understand what's going on the whole time, even if they're only listening audibly. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anything, Andy?
My podcast says like to clients, it's like to speaking opportunities, it's like to jobs. I was hired to narrate someone's audiobook because they liked my voice on my podcast. So things I never would have thought of have come from it. So, and it doesn't, making the podcast doesn't take much work. I find it's promoting and marketing the podcast that takes more time and effort than that's where I often fall short.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I know for a lot of people, the main reason I want to do this is, number one, to, get us to get more content for PPC and for ourselves. But also I know a lot of people really stop at it because they think that they don't know enough tech. I mean, that really stops a lot. Andy, I know that's completely, like I say, you're like 10 times ahead.
Well, I found even people that say, I don't know how to use tech. Well, if you've made it to a webinar, if you're surviving on Facebook, you know more than you're giving yourself credit for.
Exactly. Yeah. That's so true. That is so true. Yeah. But a lot of people will use that, I think, as a reason to stop themselves. So, and really, because I can piggyback this on other things that I'm doing, my cost level is lower, than it would be if you were just coming into it, just doing it yourself. So that's why I'm able to do all these other things behind it, because I'm doing, so many multiple ones, I do get kind of a little bit more of a price break with these companies because I'm doing so many at one time, right? Whereas if you're just doing one, it is a little bit more expensive for the hosting and all that kind of stuff. Well, awesome stuff. Well, I appreciate y'all tuning in. I'll put this recording in there. If you have any questions going forth, please let me know. Or if you think of anybody that could really be, use this information, I hope it has been helpful. I'm going to make sure to include this, PDF with it so people can just like walk right through it if they just want to be able to just, read the key points, because it really kind of excited me when I saw all the amazing things. And then it was so funny when I was in that comedian thing just to show how to be a comedian today, they started talking about podcasts. And I was like, oh, interesting, because I'm doing one today. And I raised my hand and I told them, that's interesting. I'm doing a webinar and podcast today. So it's really fun because they were talking about how it's really helped to revive a lot of careers. So I think podcasting has not hit its crescendo yet. It's still climbing and growing. I mean, especially if you think about all in the worldwide audience that is just now coming, online. So even if you were to record or do something in a different language, that's just an completely open market. My gosh, that's, hasn't even been touched. So, and then I've even been thinking about, ways to have your podcast transcripted. So where, there's new technologies that are coming out to where it can be put into written form so that maybe you can create a written blog from your audio, podcast. Who knows? I mean, there's so many ways you can, maybe it creates other things along the way. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope this has been timely, and I hope this has been relevant for you. If there's any other questions or comments, or if not, we'll just, because we've been on about half an hour now, I really appreciate you guys coming on board. Like I say, I'll have all those in there, and I'll put as many, if you think of any links or anything relevant. Andy, I wasn't even really aware of all the different Facebook groups for podcasting. So thank you for letting us know about that. That's absolutely amazing. And I'm going to be looking at that myself. All right, y'all. Well, I appreciate it. And I guess we'll say good evening. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you have an amazing Sunday.
Thanks, Pete. Bye, Linda.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.